All right, good morning and welcome to today's webinar, Human Trafficking 101, presented by the Morris County Continuum of Care Youth Advocate Committee in partnership with Legal Services of New Jersey and Covenant House, New Jersey. January is National Human Trafficking Prevention Month, and today's program will cover how to recognize signs of human trafficking when it's happening. And we will cover some important services to know about to make sure that people who need help are getting connected. Before we begin with introductions, just want to note that today's program will run from 10 a.m. until about 12 noon. I noticed that our original Zoom invite said until 11:30, so I apologize for that. Again, this will be recorded, so if you need to leave at 11:30, that is okay. We hope you can join us for the whole thing, but do what you need to do. All participants should be muted, so if I didn't mute you, please just be mindful of that so we can hear our wonderful presenters today. We will pause at the end of each presenter to do a Q&A. So you can enter your questions into the chat, or you can hold your question and we will have a special time set aside to cover questions just to keep the flow going with each presentation. As I mentioned, we will record this training and it will be posted to the CAS website and YouTube channel. I will provide those links at the end of the presentation today, and they will be emailed out for you to share and use for yourself. My name is Becca Butts. I am the Director of Outreach Programs at Family Promise of Morris County, but today you're hearing from me as the CAS Training Coordinator. CAS is a subcommittee of the Morris County Continuum of Care, otherwise referred to as the COC. The COC's goal is to end homelessness in our community. It's designed to promote community-wide planning and strategic use of resources to address homelessness, improve coordination and integration with mainstream resources, and other programs targeted to people experiencing homelessness. We improve data collection and performance measurement and allow each community to tailor its programs to the particular strengths and challenges in assisting homeless individuals and families within our community. That important work happens through our network of subcommittees, which includes the Youth Advocate Committee, who hosts today's presentation. The Youth Advocate Committee ensures that the needs of youth are considered in COC policies and planning, and that the rights of homeless youth are met. Every agency should have a youth advocate to make sure the youth that connect with their agency have someone they can work with directly. And if you'd like to join the Youth Advocate Committee or learn more about it, please contact Jennifer Amaya. I will put her email address in the chat once we get going, so you can reach out to her directly. And before we move on, I'd really like to thank Jennifer. She organized today's program for us. And of course, that takes a lot of work. So thank you, Jennifer. You did a great job. I'm really looking forward to learning from our presenters who she set up today. Just a brief look at our agenda. And that was a very quick look, but I will talk you through it in just a second. So today we're going to learn from Monica Kristen first. She'll present until around 11:15 when we pause for questions. Monica is a licensed social worker in the state of New Jersey. She currently works as a senior social worker at Legal Services New Jersey's Protect Project, which serves survivors of human trafficking. She has been working with this population for over 5 years, and she previously oversaw all crisis response and case management at the statewide service provider for human trafficking survivors at Dream Free. In these roles, Monica has connected clients to necessary services to begin recovering from exploitation. Trained in clinical social work, Monica also works with survivors to understand their trauma responses and identify their triggers. She takes pride in supporting survivors and empowering them to find their way after experiencing traumatic events associated with human trafficking. So thank you, Monica, for joining us. We will move on to Monica's portion of the presentation in just a moment. But before, I would just like to introduce Rolidel Czekaijlo. I'm sorry, I think I did mispronounce your name. Oh, I did it? Okay, thank you. Rolidel is from Covenant House, New Jersey. She will present right after Monica until about 11:45 when we do a final Q&A before wrapping up today. She is the program director for Covenant House, New Jersey's statewide Enhanced Human Trafficking Victim Services Program. And in her current role, she supervises the case management and coordination of services for victims across the state. She also currently supervises the Outreach Department and Essex County Homeless Youth Coordinated Entry, which I'm sure is a big job. In her 18 years of supervising direct care workers, she is an expert in case management, human trafficking, and crisis intervention. Working for Covenant House, New Jersey since 2004, she has held various positions and spent her last 15 years supervising the crisis shelter in Newark, New Jersey. Before coming to Covenant House, she was a child protection service worker in the state of Pennsylvania. Ms. Rolidel has a Bachelor of Arts in Sociology from the University of Albany. She has earned her master's degree in social work from Rutgers University. She's currently licensed as a social worker in the state of New Jersey, and she is a recent graduate of the Human Trafficking Leadership Academy, a training program provided by the National Human Trafficking Training and Technical Assistance Center at the Coro Institute. So we very much look forward to hearing from Rolidel in a little bit. Without further ado, I will stop sharing and allow Monica to share her portion, Human Trafficking 101. Thanks, Monica.
Okay. So good morning, everybody. Thank you so much for coming to hear a little bit more about human trafficking. As Becca said, my name is Monica, and I am here to talk about what human trafficking is, a little bit about how we can identify it, and maybe some of the impact that it might have on a survivor. I'm going to have a little bit of interactive stuff as we go through. I think Becca's going to track some of the questions at the end. If there's any more burning questions, you can feel free to email me, or we can kind of stay connected that way. So I'm going to start with a little bit of background on legal services and Protect. So for those of you who aren't aware, Legal Services of New Jersey is sort of a network of civil legal aid that exists for free across the state of New Jersey. There's 5 regional programs that provide services through 23 local offices. So this isn't really the criminal assistance. This is all the other stuff that clients might have issues with and maybe can't afford a private attorney for. Protect is one of many subunits under the umbrella of legal services. And we exist to provide holistic and comprehensive civil legal services to victims of human trafficking in New Jersey. We were launched in March 2020. Our program is out of the Edison office, but we do provide services statewide in all 21 counties to individuals who survived either sex or labor trafficking. And we provide those services regardless of their age or their immigration status. Our team at Protect is made up of 4 attorneys, including a supervising attorney, as well as 2 paralegals, and then myself, who is a social worker housed within the Protect unit. Legal Services has a whole unit that's just social workers as well, and they're tending to the needs of all the other program clients who have maybe stability issues or needs outside of the legal issues that they're seeking remedies for. Protect is the only unit that has a social worker in-house, and I think that just speaks to the trauma-informed nature of this program, trying to streamline some services, allowing us to do assessments right away, things like that. So the legal team is providing advice and representation across an array of services, which I'm going to kind of discuss closer to the end. And then as a social service provider within this unit, I'm assessing the clients as they come through and then trying to connect them to the proper services, either within our legal services network or outside to social service providers that exist to support these clients. So now I'm going to kind of get into what is human trafficking. I did want to acknowledge first that human trafficking has been in the news quite a bit. I'm not sure if anybody has followed these cases or watched these specials on TV, but I was hoping that people could maybe just put in the chat some of their thoughts in terms of, have you followed these things and have you learned anything from these stories? I know R. Kelly and Jeffrey Epstein have been in the news for some time now. Yeah. Some people are saying yes, that they're surprised or taken aback by some of this stuff. It is very sad. I think if you taken the time to watch any of the shows, it does sort of represent, they have survivors of these traffickers speaking about their experiences. And I think it allows us to see through the context of these things. And I think an important aspect is that, you know, these are very well-known public figures who were able to advance their criminal acts, I guess, through these things without really being caught or having any consequences for a long time. And I think that's what we see in reality as well. Okay, so I also just wanted to see where we're at in terms of understanding of some of the myths and realities of human trafficking. So some people on here may know a lot about human trafficking and some people might not. So I put 6 statements here. One of them is true and the rest are false. So could you just read through the 6 and let me know which one you think is false? You can put it in the chat.
I was just talking before.
So just take a guess at which one I think is the true statement here. Do we have a shy audience this morning? So thank you guys for contributing. This is why we do this, because these are myths that are like kind of shared and put forth in a lot of different ways. But the true statement here is that traffickers are often known to their victims. Just like other forms of interpersonal violence, there's some semblance of a relationship that usually exists to be exploited later on for sex or labor. Some of the other ones that were mentioned, I believe the has to cross borders. This is a really common myth that exists within, you know, talking about human trafficking. But the truth is, people are born and raised in the same town that they're trafficked. They're just leaving their home to go somewhere, or they're doing it through web and internet sites. So all these other things I think we're going to touch on here and there, but thank you so much for participating in that. So there's one sort of main takeaway that I hope people can get out of this 101, among other things, but I think it's really important that we dispel this idea that this is a foreign issue, right? Unfortunately, human trafficking is existing in the United States at really high rates. And if you look at this map, I grabbed this from the Polaris Project website, and if you're not familiar with Polaris, they collect data and they put out information and reports from US incidents, I guess. The red spots indicate where there's higher rates of this happening. So if we take a look at this, what do we see in New Jersey, right? It's completely covered by red. I've personally worked in 21 counties where this is happening. So it's a reality here. According to the US Department, the US State Department, the US is named as one of the top countries of origin for human trafficking. So this isn't just a foreign issue, and this isn't just an issue of foreigners experiencing trafficking in the US, it's happening to our citizens. This is a pervasive issue, like I said, but it tends to be a little bit more hidden, right? we might know the definition, we may have seen the movie Taken, but that doesn't mean we can spot it in our communities necessarily. Kind of staying on top of it, following the news, like being aware of its presence here, I think is going to allow us all as a society to be a little bit more aware and maybe put some things in place to help these victims. In reality, statistics are inadequate because we know a lot of forms of interpersonal violence are underreported. But just understand that this is growing so fast, it's almost taking over the biggest international crime, which is the drug trade right now. It's starting to rival that. So this has been ongoing for a long, long time. I think there are a lot of things in place right now to combat that, but the more we know, the more we can do, right? So I think it's important for us to understand the construct, the legal construct for which we are looking at this issue. I'm not an attorney, I'm not going to go into this too much detail, but just understanding that the federal law was passed in 2000, the Trafficking Victims Protection Act. And then the local law in New Jersey was passed in 2013, and they're the same. What these laws did was they created a standard definition that we can use and sentencing guidelines for the traffickers when they do traffic individuals. This is taking this idea of trafficking and sort of breaking it down into the process by which a person is recruited, the means through which they were recruited, and for what purpose. So the process is the recruiting of the client, harboring, the transportation, the provision. And then the means through which it happens is through force, fraud, or coercion. If you've been through any human trafficking training, you've probably heard that term before. Force, fraud, or coercion has to be present on the part of the trafficker to prove that they were a trafficker. That had to have been the way that they brought somebody in to be trafficked. Unless it's sex trafficking and the person is a minor. That does not have to be there. Anybody under the age of 18 cannot consent to commercial sex. They're really just a child and they need services wrapped up around them to begin to recover. And then, so it's the process, the means, and then the ends is for why are they using force, fraud, or coercion? It's for the purpose of sexual exploitation or for labor trafficking. So really minimizing this definition, it's an exchange of sex acts or services for something of value. And we break down that idea of force, fraud, or coercion. This is what it looks like. So this is the way they're exerting their power over this victim. When we look at force, it's the physical assaults, the sexual assaults, the confinement, and the isolation. This is the force, the brutality that is used in bringing these people in and keeping them sort of under their thumb. The fraud that we see is those false promises of work or living conditions, right? This is an offer of a job, and then a person comes in and they have to end up doing something very differently. This is withholding the wages and really flipping the script on them when they do show up to do that work. Coercion is where we see the threats to safety, the threats against their loved ones or their pets. It's the threat to release photographs of that person. It's the debt bondage that holds a person in place, or the psychological manipulation that we see traffickers often use. So force, fraud, or coercion is really covering from the physical to the emotional and psychological in terms of how a person is kept there. So not always physically confined to perform sex or labor. So when looking at sex trafficking, it's often also referred to as commercial sexual exploitation. And when we're looking at children, it's commercial sexual exploitation of children, so CSEC. Again, individuals under the age of 18 cannot consent. They cannot be arrested for the crime of prostitution. And it does not need to involve any movement. Sometimes they're moved across state borders. Lots of times clients don't know where they are because they're moved a lot, but it doesn't have to include that element. We see this occurring a lot in spas and massage parlors, bars or cantinas. There's residential and commercial brothels that exist in the state where you can just walk to a location and go in and purchase a person. There's escort companies that are promoting online where you can sort of book through an online portal. We see it happening in the exotic dance clubs and strip clubs. So maybe we want to believe that everybody's over the age of 18 that's working there and that they're only stripping, but the reality is they're employing plenty of minors and the expectation often exceeds just taking their clothes off. In pornography and webcam, we're seeing that a lot too, where there's a lot of demand, especially during the lockdown, and where there's a demand, it's going to be met, and it might not always be met with people who are choosing to do that work. And remembering that sexual exploitation is about the exchange of sex acts for money. I wanted to bring this up. This is a billboard of a couple, and it says, "My girlfriend would do anything for me, so I made her sell her body." And it's seemingly an anti-drug ad, right? Would this be human trafficking? Do you guys consider this based on the definitions? Do you think this is human trafficking, making her have sex with people for drugs? Yeah, people are saying yes. So it's really an exchange of anything of value. So the thing of value doesn't have to be cash. It could be drugs, it could be a place to stay, it could be items. So looking at labor trafficking, we're still looking at that process means ends model. We're still looking at it as someone exchanging another person's labor for some sort of something of value or to produce something. The common places that we're seeing this in is in the hospitality industry. People could be housekeeping or dishwashing. In the manufacturing industry, we have a lot of factories in New Jersey. People could be processing things, creating things, or even cleaning the factories. In the agricultural industry, so we have a lot of privately owned farmland in New Jersey where individuals could be brought to work and live on that land. Domestic work, what's happening is people are being recruited to live and work in an individual home. The forced selling and or cultivation of drugs, I like to point out as well, because this is something that sort of used to fall under the drug trafficking, but now it's being viewed as a labor issue where someone is now, someone's responsible for the cultivation of that product. They have to care for it, they have to package it, and then they're moving it, right? So that's human labor that's going into play there. When comparing sex trafficking and labor trafficking, sort of where it happens and how it happens, I see something that sticks out to me, which is the fact that in these common places for labor trafficking, it's understandable to see how a person can stay hidden and be more isolated. You think about that privately owned farmland where I can't go on and just educate people on their rights because it's privately owned land. Domestic workers could be living and working in an individual home. What access do they have to outsiders or to understand their rights or be able to communicate with somebody that they need help? So a lot of these happen to be late night hours or inside large buildings or just away from the public eye. Whereas when you think about sex trafficking, there's online portals where we're seeing pictures of these people. We can go to a certain place in the big cities here and we can see people offering it on the streets. So it's a lot more visual, it's a lot more interactive, whereas labor trafficking tends to be a little bit more isolated in nature. So when working with a person who is currently being trafficked or someone who's been through it already, generally speaking, survivors and victims don't often self-identify as I am being trafficked. This is still maybe not super well known, and also it's nuanced, so it doesn't always look exactly like I'm explaining it to be. So as providers who aren't necessarily specifically providing services to victims of human trafficking, we still might want to be aware that this is happening so we can connect them to the right services. So we rely on red flags or indicators that something else might be going on. Taken out of context, one thing does not necessarily say that a kid or a person is being trafficked, but if we're aware of these main indicators, it can allow us to intervene and bring in people who are practicing this. So we want to think about is this youth running away frequently? Are they often missing school on Fridays and Mondays? Are they dressing inappropriately for their age? Do they have an older partner? What is the nature of that relationship? Is there teen violence or is there domestic violence at play there? Maybe there's more going on. When talking about people who are survivors of human trafficking, a large portion of them had experienced childhood sexual abuse. So that tends to be something that we want to really mitigate and intervene on at some point, because that is a red flag for entering human trafficking. Do they have fake IDs? Are they lying about their age? Do they have control of their schedule and money? So these are red flags for sex and labor trafficking. Do they have a lot of money? Do they have unexplained items that they couldn't really afford? A parent might see that a kid has jewelry or they have a lot of cash. Where are you getting that? What's going on here? And then what is the level of isolation? Isolation is a red flag for lots of forms of interpersonal violence or abuses. So that's something that we would want to look into further anyway, but it could be that there's a trafficker involved. A couple other types of red flags, looking at it through sort of a medical model, is there a pattern of this youth seeking medical services frequently? Are they coming in with various injuries at different stages of a healing? Do they have explanations that don't make sense for those injuries? Are they presenting with multiple pregnancies, maybe multiple terminations, multiple STIs, and they're 14? That might seem like a red flag. Are they branded with some type of tattoo that doesn't make sense? Is it someone's name? This isn't 100% common across the board, but we do see traffickers like to sort of put their name on their victims. Like I said, they're not often seen, they don't see themselves as a victim, and that's understandable. Lots of people don't take that term and say, I'm a victim. They may feel like they have more control in the situation than they really do. Are they offering a script when interviewed? If there's a situation that unfolds and 3 young people are taken out and interviewed, they all have the exact same story, that's going to be a red flag. They may have fear and distrust of authority or helping professionals because they may have been sort of taught that by the trafficker, or they may just have had bad experiences and they don't want to deal. And then, are they scared of consequences greater than the situation warrants? So do we have a client who has to leave? They have to be somewhere at a certain time. Do they have to stay connected to their cell phone? Because if they don't check in every hour, they're going to be in trouble. We take the cell phone away, it might be much scarier than just they can't connect to their friends on social media. There's other consequences that if we're not aware of, it doesn't make sense to us. So the dynamics, and I'm going to get into like sort of these different elements in a little bit, but I've talked about the victim, right? I've talked about a little bit about the trafficker. So the trafficker is the person who's supplying the demand and exploits the people. The victim is the person who's brought in, who's forced to provide that service. And then there's the buyer. The buyer is the person who's purchasing the sex or purchasing the goods and items that are created through forced labor. I could be a buyer of services or goods that were created through trafficking and just not know it. That's just the nature of this stuff that we're not really made to be aware. Given it's Human Trafficking Awareness Month, if you do care, there are programs out there that are identifying services that are created, through regular regulated labor. So you can look into that. So who are the traffickers? Who are the people that are exploiting victims? As I said in the beginning, the traffickers can be strangers, but they're often known to the victim. Unfortunately, we see family members trafficking their kids, friends trafficking, maybe schoolmates. We see it through intimate partner relationships. Landlords, employers are doing that through labor trafficking. And of course, it can be happening through groups like organized crime or gangs. You might recognize this picture of Ghislaine Maxwell and Jeffrey Epstein. And there's a picture that I have here of a 20-year-old woman who was prosecuted in Passaic County for trafficking. So I put these pictures here because sometimes when we picture in our mind like who a trafficker might be, it might sort of be either this image from the 70s of what a pimp was, which is not what we see now, or it could be sort of like a menacing figure. And because what they're doing is really horrible, but they're often presenting like a Jeffrey Epstein, right? Like a regular person. Or they could be women. We often sort of default, and I do this too sometimes, of the man is the trafficker and the female is the victim. But any of these positions could be held by any gender identity. And so if we take those blinders off, we might be able to see more happening because we're not expecting it to be one way specifically. Traffickers are very skilled at bringing people in. This is their full-time job of making sure that they're making money because they're exploiting somebody. And although the recruitment may happen through force, like I mentioned the movie Taken, where she's sort of bag over the head, gun to her back, and tied up somewhere. That does happen. But what we see more often, and especially with the younger ages, is that traffickers put in a little bit more time in the beginning and build up trust with them so they can exploit it later. And then the victim is less likely to be wanting to leave every second of the day. they commonly use this tactic called boyfriending, where the trafficker will identify a target. They look for certain vulnerabilities that they can exploit to build trust very quickly. So a person may be in need of things that the trafficker can provide. They may build up this victim through the false promises of a relationship, or making them believe they're in an intimate relationship with the trafficker. After that honeymoon phase happens, the trafficker then sort of uses that trust to get them to provide sex. And this is very confusing for the person. And it sort of follows this classic cycle of abuse, where there's that honeymoon phase where there's like trust and love being built. But then there's buildup, there's explosion, and there's come down, and there's all these other phases where there's abuses happening. But when the cycles back down to that positive part, it reinforces why the person is there, and that, oh, he does love me, or this is why I fell in love with him, or whatever it may be. And it reinforces that person to stay, because they're always seeking that love and validation from that person. So it's being reinforced, but also throughout those other stages, they're experiencing abuses that are affecting their self-esteem and their self-worth, and maybe leaving them less likely to walk away, feeling confident enough to make it on their own. So it's sort of two parts there that's happening, and this is done by design. The traffickers want to make this person believe that they cannot survive without me. Labor trafficking, that could happen in labor trafficking as well, but we do see it a little bit more through social media, through word of mouth, through really standard forms of employment recruiting. It's just not a real offer. So a lot of the clients I'm working with right now were contacted through Facebook. And these are foreign clients who are brought here, but they're saying, hey, I have a job, I think you'd be right for it. Oftentimes these clients want to leave a bad situation, so they're willing to maybe even look past some of the red flags, but they might not even be there. They may just say, yeah, this is the work I do, I would like to do this in the US. Word of mouth is really common too. I would trust, even now, getting regular employment, if a friend is recommending me or recommending a place to me, that makes me feel like I can trust that. So what we see is people in communities saying, hey, my cousin's cousin is hiring, you should contact him. And the middleman might not even be aware that it's going to turn into trafficking, but they're just passing the word along. So after the initial recruitment phase that may look one way, there's nothing holding the trafficker back from using that force and those threats and those coercion, anything that they can do to keep the person there. So it may look like a boyfriend to the client, but eventually it could, after a couple of weeks or months, it could turn into a really abusive situation. So I mentioned before that some of this stuff happens online. Sex trafficking recruitment is occurring there as well. Everything happens online these days. And with the cell phone, our kids have access to so many things. According to Polaris, 55% of domestic minor sex trafficking survivors who entered the life reported meeting their trafficker for the first time while using text, website, or mobile app. And there was a statistics that 63% used online methods during this process. There's a picture here of the 15 apps. You can find different lists online of 19 apps or 25, and I think they're changing a lot. But the reality is that anytime there's an application that we're accessing where there's very few regulations and our children can interact with lots of people very quickly, there's a risk there. I've seen it a lot through the apps like Kik, which is a chat app, or I think there's like, I don't know, Discord and Kaleidoscope, where you can video chat with strangers. Gaming apps are becoming very popular, where you can connect with lots of people in a very innocent way, but these traffickers know what they're looking for and how to exploit that person. You're literally chatting with people. You can ask lots of questions. You can get a lot of information from an innocent child. They're then moving the conversation to another platform that's less regulated. So I put a resource in here. I got these statistics from the Polaris project, and they actually have a list on this blog of, they sort of have toolkits for how to prepare or how to plan against or how to prepare for safety online, especially with kids. So if you're interested in that, that'll be in the PowerPoint. And then we get to who are the people who end up getting exploited? Who are the victims? There's not one set of demographics I could provide to say that this is what a victim would be. But what I said before is that the traffickers are looking for certain vulnerabilities to exploit. So it kind of theoretically could be anybody. We really need to educate and help mitigate some of these things for all of our kids. But really, these traffickers are looking for where is some place that they have a need and I can fill that. So individuals who are cut off from their natural supports, children who are running away, home might not be safe. They're going to be at a heightened risk. Kids who are already involved in the children's system of care, they're going to be more vulnerable. Individuals who identify as LGBTQIA+, they are going to be vulnerable. They overrepresent the homeless youth population. And so that's sort of two areas in which they're being made vulnerable. As I mentioned before, those who have a history of childhood sexual abuse or any type of exposure to abuse are going to be at a heightened risk. Undocumented and individuals who are here on temporary guest visas, they're going to be at a heightened risk, whether they're a youth or adults, because they just might not know the laws, they might not know any programs available to assist them, and they might not know the language. Real quick, I just wanted to touch on this idea of intersectionality in terms of how our clients in any sector are coming to us more than just the one issue that they're trying to seek assistance with. So my clients are coming to me, they have to sort of identify or be identified as a survivor of human trafficking. That in and of itself is a major social issue and a major issue that they dealt with. But there's other things at play that are giving this person their reality. They may have experienced discrimination on so many different levels before the trafficking. And while they were trafficked, they could have experienced the issues associated with a lot of other social issues, right? So were they homeless at the time? Were they experiencing addiction? Did they have an underlying mental illness as well? And these are important when trying to provide services to a person. I'm going to get into a little bit about the trauma that exists as well, but we kind of need to remember that this client isn't one-dimensional, right? They're coming to us with so many other issues and we can't cure them, we can't fix them, but we can be aware that this is multidimensional in terms of possibly the exploitation and discrimination that they experience. So what's the impact of human trafficking on a person? I'm sure you won't be surprised to hear that there's sort of physical and a psychological impact. I sort of pulled these from a study that I read, and not all of these are going to be present and not all of these are going to happen specifically to children. But what I want to really point out is that it makes sense that some of these things are going to happen, right? A person could experience contracting an STI. They could have chronic pain or memory loss. They could experience physical and sexual assaults during their whole time of being trafficked, whether they were labor trafficked or trafficked for sex. The other thing to consider is that a person may have a regular issue, cold, flu, they may have contracted an STI, but they might not have access to healthcare. So some things that could have really been remedied right away because the trafficker is controlling them and doesn't want to pay for healthcare, they might not be able to seek healthcare for that in order to get better, and it could lead to long-term problems. The environments could lead to long-term problems. Maybe they were holed up in a hotel room that had a lot of mold, and later on they're going to have respiratory issues. So there's like a lot of secondary health issues that could come into play when considering even a short-term period of trafficking that a person experienced, especially at a young age. You know, the younger a person is when they experience terrible things, it does have an effect throughout the lifetime. So psychologically speaking, a person who experienced trafficking, we can assume that they probably are going to leave there with some trauma. People experience trauma differently, right? I can't tell you you have experienced trauma. You're going to have some common trauma responses at play here that are going to maybe make us recommend an assessment where they can then maybe get a diagnosis. This is a chart that breaks it down between some common trauma responses depending on the age of the child. So we could see some regression with kids if there is trauma. We could see changes in sleep patterns and eating patterns. By regression, I mean, is a kid wetting the bed again? Is a kid having trouble with that? Are they acting younger than they really are? It could be a way that the child is acting out. Not a lot of us are just born with tools for how to process our trauma or how to really regulate our emotions if we haven't really been taught that. So a lot of this stuff is how the kids sort of socialized to act out. And we kind of have, the more we're aware of it, the more we can intervene and assist so they can get the right services before they grow into an adult who has those dysregulation problems and, you know, the brain changes that come with trauma. So just some to point out is just, you know, the anxiety and depressive symptoms that are going to come out, right? That might just be alone, like, hey, let's recommend assessment or get them some services. The concentration, difficulty concentrating, they might have really bad nightmares. They might have many dissociative episodes where they're feeling like they're re-experiencing a terrible event. When they get a little bit older, addiction might come into play, right? Are they using really heavily? Are they not being able to show up for the things that they were saying they used to do? Like they were really into sports and theater and they're not doing that anymore. Are they, you know, becoming defiant? This is the word we use a lot with teens, and oppositional and defiant and angry is often how our older kids are representing the trauma that they experienced. With that being said, you know, depression and anxiety tend to be commonly diagnosed among this population, as well as trauma issues and trauma disorders. And that makes sense to me. And that makes sense to how our children are presenting those things. Something else I wanted to point out was this idea of polyvictimization or complex trauma. So according to National Children's Advocacy Center, this describes the experience of multiple victimizations of different types, such as sexual abuse, physical abuse, bullying, exposure to family violence, and more. This definition emphasizes different kinds of victimization rather than just multiple episodes of the same kind of victimization, because it signals a generalized vulnerability. Research shows that the impact of polyvictimization is much more powerful than even multiple events of a single type. So that's not to diminish a person who's experienced childhood sexual abuse for years. That's still going to leave an impact in that they still deserve to have services. This idea of polyvictimization or complex trauma, which you may have heard before, I think is important in understanding sort of that intersectionality that I brought up before, that a person is not just dealing with one thing, and that a person who experienced human trafficking, to them, that period of their life might not even been the worst thing that happened to them. So in treating this client or connecting them to services, it may be a little bit more complex because, you know, what's the most presenting issue here? We may assume it's human trafficking. But if a parent is sexually abusing them, that's really a big thing to work through and get over as well. Something else is that this polyvictimization could be on a macro level where a person experienced exposure to domestic violence, sexual assault as a child, teen dating violence when they got all different types of victimization before the human trafficking across their lifespan. But polyvictimization could also occur during the trafficking itself. So even if they were abducted and trafficked for 7 days, a lot of things can happen in that. You could witness different violent acts, you could experience threats and coercion, you could experience sexual and physical assaults in that time. And that's going to leave some complicated emotional scars for that person. When we talk about trauma, we often think about post-traumatic stress disorder, which is a defined diagnosis in the DSM. You know, there's certain time periods, there's certain symptoms that a person should be exhibiting in order to get this diagnosis, and then they can be referred to a specialist who can help them work through that trauma and kind of be in a place where they can reintegrate and not feel scared that they're going to have a flashback or something like that. Part of this treatment is identifying triggers, and a trigger is like something they hear, smell, feel, a location that reminds them of a terrible event. And it may bring them back where they re-experience it, and it's a memory that comes into their mind where they feel like they're there again. We try to help people desensitize from those or plan against these triggers because sometimes they come on without realizing it. When we're looking at the sort of quick layering of these different types, this polyvictimization that's occurring, it may be a little bit more difficult to identify the triggers and really parse out what the events were, because it's just sort of a constant stream of exposure to traumatic events. There's plenty of really specialized and qualified people who are doing this work with people. But as a person who's experienced those things, it might be very daunting to try to work through that. It's constantly remembering bad things. It's just constantly trying to challenge your thoughts. And that can be very exhausting and very demoralizing for a person, whereas they might not want to face that. Another area I wanted to really touch on here is this idea of trauma bonding. This doesn't happen in every situation. It doesn't happen with all victims, but it does exist. And I think it's important for us to remember and realize when we're working with a survivor, because it might explain some of their responses. So trauma bonding is often compared to Stockholm syndrome, right? Where a victim was taken, but then they're sort of identifying with the survivor, with the trafficker or the perpetrator, sort of a way that we can normalize the situation and just psychologically feel better. Trauma bonding is a tiny bit different because this is on purpose. This is a trafficker seeking out a person who they know is going to build that trust quickly. So in looking at this definition, it's when a trafficker uses rewards and punishments within the cycle of abuse to foster a powerful emotional connection with the victim. Traffickers may take on a role of protector to maintain control of the victim, create confusion, and develop a connection or attachment, which may include the victim feeling a sense of loyalty to or love for the trafficker. This connection or traumatic bond becomes especially intense when fear of the trafficker is paired with gratitude for any kindness shown. Trauma bonding, including cases of trafficking, may occur within familial relationships in which the perpetrator could be a parent. So in thinking back to that boyfriending and that love bombing that occurs in the earlier stages, they're purposely trying to confuse loyalty and trust and love, and maybe even combining a parental role where they're providing for that person. That person may feel like, well, in some ways, my life is better now because I have a roof over my head every night and I have steady meals. And that's sort of the mental gymnastics that's occurring to normalize this and make them feel connected to the trafficker in a positive way, even though this all occurred out of abuse. This is important because we could go in and we could remove a 15-year-old from a trafficking situation physically, but they're maybe trying to contact the trafficker and get back to the trafficker for weeks because they haven't emotionally and psychologically disentangled from this bond. So some recommendations with working with this population is really just generally about how we approach people who have a lot of trauma. Making sure their basic needs are met is really an important step. In doing the crisis work out there, I think it's pretty standard where we're like, do you need clothing, food? Have you slept? Do you have a safe place to go? These are going to be the things you want to get out of the way first. And speaking, because I'm working at a legal office, the goals are a little bit more long-term. We can't expect a client to be in a place to want to come and tell their story if they don't have transportation, they don't have food, they don't have childcare, right? These are things we need to consider if we want them to be successful with the legal issues. What does safe and comfortable mean to them? Is your office, does it have something triggering in there? Or do they feel safe in that town? Maybe they were trafficked there, that's where the trafficker is. We can't know everything about a client's triggers and we can't mitigate or intervene on every single thing, but having that conversation is going to build trust, and making them feel a little bit more comfortable is going to build a little bit of trust there too. I would suggest being clear about your role and explaining the process very clearly to them as best that we can. I remember kind of being young case manager in the field, really wanting to give all the answers to this client because they've been through so much, right? We want to kind of have that for them and help them. But the truth is, if I don't have the answer, it's going to be better for them that I'm honest with them, because they're going to lose trust in me if they feel like I'm lying or I'm not doing my part in following through. I think across the board, really it's important that we listen and not judge them. As I said before, these survivors of trafficking may have had other forms of violence that they experienced or abuses that they have reported and people didn't believe them. They might not have a lot of faith in helping professionals. The least I can do is believe them, even if it sounds really out there, because the risk of me looking silly by believing it is, I think, less damaging than the risk of not believing that person who's been through something really, really terrible. So minutes here, some of the legal assistance that does exist for this population, just so we can understand. A lot of times we think of the criminal issue, right? A client was trafficked, so we want to report to law enforcement, and then law enforcement can do the investigation and arrest the traffickers and prosecute them, and they can go to jail. This isn't a really seamless process in terms of the criminal stuff, but that's not what legal services does. We can look at all the other stuff that was happening. So when a referral comes into legal services, it's going to be sort of an intake that happens with the paralegal, and then it's passed on to an attorney who does a legal assessment. They want to know, okay, we know you're identified as a survivor of trafficking, but what else went on during that time? For example, did your trafficker use your social security number to take out loans or to file for benefits for you, and you don't have access to them now? Were you able to pay taxes or file anything under your name? Because you worked all those hours and you were never paid, you might have wage claims to the Department of Labor that we can process. Do they have a criminal record? Were they being trafficked and food was withheld? So they went out to the grocery store and stole food and they were arrested for that. These are things that can be explored through vacatur and expungement. Immigration relief is a huge part of what's done for these survivors across the board. So if a person is if they're a foreigner, they were trafficked to the US for labor or sex, there are different remedies that can be explored through T visas and things like that, which I'm going to touch on in a little bit as well. Let's see, safety and security. So the attorneys can also act as victim rights attorneys, and they can also talk them through who to report to, what that's going to look like. Do you need an order of protection against this person? Do you need divorce? Do you need custody arranged for your child? We do see that some survivors have children with the trafficker, so it really complicates things because that trafficker has parental rights. Yeah, I think that covered those things. So for the immigration remedies, this isn't necessarily exhaustive, but these are the common ones that we're seeing. Again, I'm putting it in very simple terms, but continued presence is one remedy that can be provided to clients through law enforcement if they are working with law enforcement on this specific case. This is specific to human trafficking cases. If they are offered continued presence through a law enforcement entity, it provides them with a work authorization and a social security number. This helps them stabilize. With the social security number, they can then apply for benefits. They can get covered by insurance. They can begin to work and make savings and create a life for themselves. They may also be assessed, and the attorney might say, we can file for a T visa for you. This is a visa that is a pathway to citizenship. Continued presence is not. The visa is a process through which they have to tell their story. The attorneys put together this packet, they apply for it. And then if they are approved for that, they can receive benefits the same as a refugee. So they can receive cash assistance, free English classes, assistance with work. They can receive the regular benefits such as food stamps and Medicaid and all of that while they're getting on their feet. This is a way to bring their family over here from the other country if they're still at risk and they're fearful of returning back to their country because of the trafficking. Special immigrant juvenile status is another area that's explored with the attorneys for individuals who are under the age of 21 who had to flee their country due to gang violence or human trafficking. So on that note, a lot of this stuff can be very negative and heavy. And there are some good things that are happening. There's a lot of advocates, especially in our state, who are really doing the work to bring the best services to these clients and make some institutional changes. So we have seen some things happen very recently. BCCO is Victims of Crime Compensation. It's a fund that New Jersey and other states have that if a client they were a victim of a crime, they can receive support through the state. This is something that we do with our clients. We help them apply for this as well. This can cover things like medical bills as a result of the trafficking, psychological help, even relocation if it's necessary. They recently updated and expanded some of the services that they cover for victims of human trafficking. So there's sort of an acknowledgement that maybe they need services a little bit broader than what we were helping them with, for example. The Debt Bondage Repair Act was passed last year, which is acknowledging that financial fraud and identity theft does happen between traffickers and their victims. And this can help sort of wipe some of the debt that they may have incurred, or it can fix their credit score because this can hold them back if nothing else is at play from moving forward with their life and trying to kind of get back on their feet. In addition to that, Governor Murphy very recently signed a law that expands vacatur and expungement. So I had mentioned that example before of stealing the food, but it was pretty narrow in scope in New Jersey, and it's been expanded a little bit to really provide relief to individuals who have maybe they were prosecuted for something, not just the charges, and that can be worked on and appealed to relieve that, which is huge. So as a client's recovering from all of this, if they're trying to get into the workforce, we've had clients who got job offers, they started, then they pulled the criminal report and they didn't even know they had charges in other states and they lose their job. They can be very serious crimes as well, and there are self parameters, but I think it's good. We're expanding, we're recognizing the other areas in which a person can be impacted by human trafficking. And we're really working hard as a state to alleviate those issues so that way they can really recover. So that brings me to the end of my portion. We do have some information online, and this is the Protect Hotline email if someone did want to make a referral for our services. So I don't know if there were any questions or if.
I don't see any questions in the chat.
Okay.
So people can feel free to unmute and ask a question or put a question in the chat and I will read it. Monica, thank you. I'm so impressed at the amount of information you were able to cover in that amount of time. And it is such a complex, nuanced issue. And you answered all of my questions. Like I had a list and you touched on them already. And I appreciate very much that you ended with good news and information on how people can get connected to your incredible services.
Mm-hmm. Thank you so much for having me. Yeah, I feel like it could be a day long training. So I'm trying to skim some of the issues, but thank you.
I'm seeing more thank yous in the chat. We'll give everybody a minute in case you need to think. That was a lot to take in. Thank you, very informative. Can you show that list of websites to watch out for?
Yep, so when I can send you the presentation, I'll just sort of prepare it. And then I actually have a slide at the end that has all my sources, but I can put that link is there. Actually, it's the Polaris report from 2019. You scroll to the bottom, it has all those.
Thank you. And I will mention, if anybody is not on the CAST distribution list or receives email for Youth Advocate Committee, please message me your your email address and I will make sure that you get it. Allison Del Caso is also letting me know that there will be a link for survey feedback, and we'll make sure that everyone gets that. I'll drop it in the chat now in case anyone needs to jump off early, and then I'll give it to everyone again. So I'll put that in just a minute. More feedback that this was incredible. There's one more question. Do you provide workshops for community and parents? Great question.
Yeah, well, I do presentations sort of in lots of locations and for lots of different groups. So I don't see why that couldn't be part of that. Lots of times I present with an attorney who goes into a little bit more detail about that stuff and really ties it into social services wouldn't be what they are without the legal services and vice versa. So that could be part of it too.
Great, thank
you. So you can email, I guess, me if you really had something in mind.
Thanks. Yes,
there are a lot of, yeah, sorry. Go ahead.
Oh, no, go ahead. Someone was saying in the chat that this is great information for parents to have.
Yeah, and there's a lot of sources out there in terms of human trafficking. So, in my sources, you'll see like there are some pretty big hitters in terms, like you said, you said CAS, but there are pretty big hitters in terms of providing information and technical assistance for human trafficking. So if someone is interested, there really is a lot out there.
People can feel free to continue asking questions, and Monica, if you're able to stick around for a couple more minutes, Monica will respond. Rolidel, please feel free to start sharing your presentation. Sure, we're all eager to hear from you next.
Yeah, okay.
Good
morning. My name is Rolidel, as Rebecca said perfectly. And I am so thankful to be here in a space with other social providers that work with young people ages 18 to 24. So I have two end in mind today for my portion of the presentation. One is to introduce you as a social service provider to a screening tool that you can use at your agency to help identify victims of human trafficking. And then my second end in mind is to talk to you about the services that the program I currently run provides. So I currently run the Enhanced Statewide Human Trafficking Victim Services Program. So just to share a little bit about Covenant House. Covenant House International is the largest agency serving youth experiencing homelessness in the United States. We have 31, we operate in 31 cities across North and Central America. We have 2 sites in Canada. We have 1 site off the mainland in Alaska. We have sites from California all the way down to New York. And we have sites in 5 countries in Central America. In Central America, we don't go by Covenant House, we go by Casa Alancia. And because of the work that we do with young people experiencing homelessness, one of the things that we are very much committed to is really learning and understanding how trafficking impacts the young people that we work with. In the state of New Jersey, Covenant House was established in 1989. And in the state of New Jersey, we work with 18 to 21. And the reason why I tell you the age is because all Covenant House does work with adolescents, but we all work with a different population. In Latin America, we work with the younger population, 8 to 18. And in some of the other states, we work up to the age of 24. So because of the age of the population that we work with, some of them are just too old to access the child protection systems, and some are just too young to navigate the adult systems. And sometimes even if they can navigate it, there is not a perfect fit for them, right? They're still just too young for the adult systems. And because of that, in the state of New Jersey, we provide residential and supportive services to the young people that we work with. We do have 2 crisis shelters, one in New York and one in Atlantic City. We also have transitional living program. We offer permanent supportive housing, and we have an after care program that works with our young people that live in the community through many different voucher programs, from Shelter Plus Care to Almost Home to Rapid Rehousing. So in working with the population that we've been working with, one of the things that we understand is that there is a correlation between the risk factor of being homeless and human trafficking. So since 1989, we have been aware that some of our clients have experienced human trafficking. But we weren't specifically asking them questions about human trafficking, right? So there was no assessment that we were using to sort of understand or know that they were experiencing the trafficking. It was just really based on conversations that we were having with them. And because of that, we became aware of research that was being done that demonstrated that there is a correlation between the risk factor of being homeless, right, out in the streets, and being trafficked. And we knew as an agency that we needed to do something about it. So with that, in 2015, we focused on a research project at Covenant House in collecting the trafficking experiences of our young people. And based on that research that we did, we were able to publish a report and new findings on human trafficking experiences amongst homeless youth with evidence-based services and how best to serve them. This here actually is one of the journals that we published, and that picture was drawn by one of our young people living in the shelter. So in 2017, based on that research that we started in 2015, we were able to release our first screening tool, which you're going to learn about. And we call it the QUIT, which is the Quick Youth Indicators for Trafficking. And it was published in March of 2019 in the Children and Youth Services Review, which is a journal that is focused on children, family that, and the systems that are there to support them. So my goal hopefully is to demonstrate how to use this screening tool so that your agency can maybe consider whether or not it's something that you want to put together. So what is the goal of using a screening tool? The goal of using a screening tool is not for us to identify more trafficking victims, right? That's not what we want to do. The goal of using a screening tool really is for us to identify victims so that we can properly give them services. So what are the differences between an assessment and a screening tool? Most of us in the work that we do have to do assessments, right? But there's a clear difference between using an assessment and doing a screening tool. So an assessment is really a thorough review of what has happened, right? And when we're talking about a thorough review, what we're asking is for someone to disclose what has happened to them. And we all know that sometimes asking someone to disclose what has happened to them could be re-traumatizing, right? So the screening tool is just an opposite. We're not asking for any disclosure as to what has happened, right? It reveals it on its own. So a screening tool would indicate that there's a likelihood of trafficking without ever requiring or even requesting disclosure. And why is this important? This is really, really important because in order for us to ask for someone to disclose what has happened to them, you really first need time to build a relationship, right? We need to do this with trust and privacy, and that can sometimes take time. And we don't always want to use an assessment because, as I said, sometimes using an assessment can cause unnecessary re-traumatization. We can re-traumatize a client unnecessarily. One of the things that we have learned, and Monica touched upon it, is that sometimes victims don't identify as being trafficked, right? There's a lot of stigma that comes, there's still stigma that comes with having been a victim of trafficking. A lot of our young people don't even understand what trafficking is, right? So they don't understand what it means, or maybe for them, that's not what happened to them, right? Because when they think of trafficking, they sort of think of what they've seen in the media. That means I had to be handcuffed or that someone had to move me from state to state. So they don't see themselves as a trafficking victim. Some of our young people are very much embarrassed to be categorized as trafficked, right? They don't want that label. And we find that a lot in our crisis center, that when we do an assessment and we find that a young person has been trafficked, they don't really want to deal with the label of being trafficked. And they don't want to be blamed for their situation. Sometimes when we work with our young people, what we find is that they may have sometimes willingly have gone into a situation that they then changed their mind, and it quickly went from something that maybe they willingly went into to being trafficked, and that there's a lot of self-blame that happens there. And sometimes there's blame from service providers or with people that are working with them. And for a lot of the young people that we work with, and this is just based on, having been in systems before where they've had many assessments, it's that they're just tired of talking about it. They don't want to talk about past events. As far as they can see, it doesn't change anything that has happened, and it doesn't change anything that's happening to them now. So I don't want to talk about it. So this here is a screening tool, as I said, that we had published in 2017. So it's not an assessment. As you can see, it's only 4 questions. not only is it just 4 questions, there's only 4 possible answers for each question, right? So each one is either yes, no, refuse to answer, or don't know. So I'm going to read through the question and sort of talk about different ways that you can phrase a question when asking it to a young person, and also how is it that it's broken down, right? So the first question is, it is not uncommon for young people to stay in work situations that are risky or even dangerous, simply because they have no other options. Have you ever worked or done other things in a place that made you feel scared or unsafe? The second question, we say sometimes people are prevented from leaving an unfair or unsafe work situation by their employers. Have you ever been afraid to leave or quit a work situation due to fears of violence or threats of harm to yourself or your family? So both questions were asking about work situations. Sometimes in working with the population that we work with, we have learned that when we say work, they think about like a paycheck, right? So that if they've ever done any type of work and they didn't receive a paycheck, they will say no to you. So we have sort of learned to define to them what work can be. So we'll say to them, it can be any job you did, whether or not you got a paycheck. It can be something you did for someone where they paid you with something else. Maybe they paid you with food, or maybe they paid you with a place to stay, right? So you can help define what work is, whether it's something in a traditional sense or something that wasn't traditional. The third question is, sometimes young people who are homeless or who are having difficulties with their families have very few options to survive or fulfill their basic needs, such as food and shelter. Have you ever received anything in exchange for sex? So even when we did this research, one of the things that quickly came to us is that number 3 can also be positive for survival sex, right? And survival sex, as exploitive as it may be, is not necessarily sex trafficking, right? But we have also learned in Covenant House that it is very important that if someone says yes to this question and in their diagnostic assessment are not positive for trafficking, we should still provide them wraparound supportive services, because it's a greater risk factor to end up in a trafficking situation, right? So you want to provide them with that support so it doesn't turn into trafficking. And then the final question is, sometimes employers don't want to know about the kind of work they have young employees doing. To protect themselves, they ask their employees to lie about the kind of work they are involved in. Have you ever worked for someone who asked you to lie while speaking to others about the work you do? So number 4, again, reinforces the casual work situation. It provides the same clarification about employers and employees. And again, a yes for that can be possible labor trafficking. So what's great about this tool? What's great about this tool is that it's broad, right? There's no re-traumatizing here when we ask these questions. The answers are, the questions themselves are dichotomous, right? So it's either yes or no. We're not asking anyone to provide us with any more details than they need to. The second thing is that the questions balance trauma and resilience, right? So one of the things that we do is that the first question, if you notice, is destigmatizing, right? So we say it is not uncommon, right? So we try to normalize that this can happen to a lot of people. The second, and we also, within the second question, we try to provide some education, right, on how it may look like And it's trauma informed, right? So we say, has this ever happened to you, right? Have you ever worked? Have you ever been afraid, right? Have you ever received? So the questions are structured in a way that does not traumatize a client. It normalizes the experience that they had. It provides some education, and it only elicits a yes or no answer. So this tool has a true scientific validity for people ages 18 up, right? So when we did this study, we did it with our young people and 18 to 21, but it's evidence-based for young people 22 to 24. In other words, this is still a great tool to use with a population that is 18 to 24. And it has the gold standard validation, and this is, I'm not a scientist, but this is a big thing in the science community. It means that you have a tool that is good and is proven to be effective. And it's unambiguous. All you need is one yes. If you have one yes in any of these 4 questions, it means that the young person likely may have experienced an incident of trafficking. Because it also screens for lifetime experience, right? So whether it happened yesterday or 10 years ago, you would still get a yes in one of those questions if they had that experience. And because disclosure is not the goal, right? So we're not eliciting any storytelling from the client, so you're not going to re-traumatize anyone. And the goal is for us to be able to identify someone so that we can provide services. So who can do this quit? Anyone can do this quit, right? You don't need a formal training. As a matter of fact, I sort of just gave you a training, right? So anyone can do this quit. In our agency, we've had the attorney do it. We've now changed it to where the youth coordinated specialist does it at the crisis center. So anyone at any experience level can do this quit screening. And again, one positive, one yes equals to a person likely having experienced an episode of trafficking. So as we said, you know, screening is the first process, right? And we do screening first because you don't want to do a diagnostic tool. Using a diagnostic tool, you need an expert to do it, right? So not just anyone and everyone should do a diagnostic tool. B, they take time. Diagnostic tools typically have a lot of questions that need to be answered. So in my program, the Human Trafficking Victim Services program, the diagnostic tool that we utilize is called the TIVIT, which is the Trafficking Victim Identification Tool. At the Crisis Center, we use the HMIAT-14 that has 14 questions. It's a tool that was actually validated and authored, if you will, by Covenant House, New York. So those are like long tools, and those are tools that we would never use first with the client unless we absolutely need to. So the only time a diagnostic tool should ever be used is if you have a positive quit, right? So if a young person has tested positive, that just shows that there's a likelihood. It hasn't proven that they've been trafficked. That's just a likelihood that they have. Now we want to move on and do a diagnostic tool. So we did the screening tool, right? Now, the next step after doing the screening tool, as I said, would be to do a risk and safety assessment and then intervention. What happens if your agency is not equipped to do a diagnostic tool? If you remember what we said early on is that the goal of doing the screening tool is not to find out if you are working with the victim of trafficking, right? That cannot be the end goal. The end goal really is to find out if you're working with the victim of trafficking and then connect them to the appropriate services. So when we do this training, what we like to say to the people that we train is that we taught you how to use the tool. The second step would be that if you use this tool and you have someone that has said yes to one of the questions, is that you would move on and you would do the diagnostic assessment, you would do a risk and safety assessment, and you would provide intervention. If you are an agency that does not have the capacity to do a diagnostic assessment or provide supportive case management to a victim, then Covenant House, New Jersey can be that agency to provide your client with support. So in October of 2020, Covenant House, New Jersey, just based on the work that we had been doing with the victims that we were working with at our shelter, and based on all the publications and research that we did, we were awarded the statewide grant through the Office of the Attorney General to be the statewide provider. What shifted for us is that this program, the program that I run, doesn't work with a specific age or housing status. So you don't have to be homeless, and you don't have to be 18 to 21. So we work with survivors on all housing status and all age. The services that we provide are comprehensive. So we work with 2 resource specialists. There's one right now on the training. Her name is Jenny and Anna. And what they do is that they do direct care with victims and survivors. So the number that you see, and I'm going to keep this number up as I talk about the services that we provide. This number here, the 862 number, is available 24 hours a day, 7 days a week to victims and survivors. So that if a victim or a survivor is having an emergency and they need help at 2 o'clock in the morning and they call this number, they're going to get one of the members of the team. For social service providers that are working for victims, this number is also available to you. So the number is available 24 hours a day for emergency help, and then it's available also for providers working with clients and law enforcement officers. When we work with the survivor, what we do is really first work to meet whatever emergency needs that they have. And that can be anything, including housing, right? So if we have a survivor that's in need of emergency shelter, we work to see what would make more sense. For some of our survivors, because of the time of day or because of their circumstances, it might be placing them in a hotel for the moment. For some of our survivors, it might be connecting them to a domestic violence shelter. There are no shelters in the state of New Jersey just for trafficking. Typically, when we are looking for shelter services for our survivors, we're actually connecting to domestic violence shelter. For some of our victims, if they are between the ages of 18 to 24, we can place them in one of our shelters. If you remember early on, I said that we work with victims, that we work with young people ages 18 to 21 at our shelter. Because of this grant, we work with 18 to 24-year-olds if they are survivors of trafficking. So those are the housing that we are able to connect our victims and survivors to. The other thing that we do is we connect our victims and survivors to any resources that they are in need of, right? So it goes from documents, we stay on the phone with the Social Security Administration to get those appointments. We take them to the appointments. We help them get birth certificates. We help them get state IDs. We help them with basic needs. Just last week, we had about, I want to say 3 or 4 survivors that needed help with food, right? So what we do is we connect them. We first buy them food, right? We do the Instacart, we get the food delivered to them. And then we try to connect them with local food pantry. So anything that a victim needs is what we would help them with. I often get asked, do I have a pamphlet of the type of services we provide? And I'm always a little hesitant because there isn't something that we wouldn't help a victim with. If we can't do it, then we'll figure out who can. But our goal is always to help a victim and a survivor get the services that they need so that they can be stable. We work with labor and sex trafficking. We work with nationals and non-citizens. Part of what we do is that we have access to translation lines, so language is not a barrier. We've worked with victims that are Mandarin speaking and Portuguese speaking, and it doesn't stop the work that we do. For victims that are 18 to 24 that are placed in our shelter, we have specialized services there too. So we have licensed clinical social workers that have been trained in EMDR, which is eye movement desensitization and reprocessing, which is a form of therapy that is used with victims that have experienced trauma. So they are trained in how to use EMDR, and that's the form of therapeutic services that they use with clients. We also have legal services on site for victims and survivors, as well as staff members that provide case management. For those that don't live with us in our program, they get connected to our resource specialist who provides the same type of support. A lot of the services that we connect our survivors to are community partners that specialize in trafficking, right? So our legal partner is Legal Services of New Jersey. So we work very closely with Monica. Our mental health providers that we work closely with are Sonar, right? And they've been in the trafficking business, if you will, for many, many, many years. We work with HR Recovery. So those are the services that are available to you. And I want to, again, stress that one of the goals or strategic plan that we have at Covenant House is really providing providers that work with the population that you serve, 18 to 24, to start using the screening tool. Working with that population, you're definitely working with the population that is more at risk of being trafficking. And identification is important, right? So we want to get this tool out. It's being used in many, many agencies, and we want to see those numbers grow. But we don't want you to just use a tool to identify victims. We want our victims and survivors to get the care and support that they need. And if your agency is not equipped to provide the specialized case management, you can still use that screening tool, and you can call this number, and you can refer the client for a diagnostic assessment with our resource specialist. So that if the young person has experienced trafficking, that they can get the specialized services that would help them move forward on their life goals. Yeah, and I think that's it. So I am open for questions. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm just opening the chat now. I already have a question.
Sure.
I was wondering, I was just looking for the link for the quit screening. Is that something that we could share with everyone?
Yes, and I should have had it ready, but yes, it
No
is.
problem.
I'm going to look for it, and if I don't get it now quickly, Rebecca, I can email it to you and Jennifer so that you can
Yes.
get it to everyone, but I should be able to get it.
No problem. We'll make sure that everybody gets it. And I was just wondering, you answered it a little bit at the end, that this is a tool that you would really like everyone to be using. Would you recommend that all shelters and other settings where we're encountering at-risk individuals, that we just do that, this screening as much as possible?
Yeah, and we actually, yes, I do. We, our youth coordinated entry specialist, we have her now. They started about a year ago. She uses it with the 18 to 24 population when she goes out to the other shelters to do her assessment, her VIs for that.
Yes.
She has included the quit as part of her assessment. And, you know, and when she does, if someone does have a positive indicator, she talks to them about the services that we provide and asks whether or not they would like to meet with us. And in that moment, we, you know, ask them if they want to do the assessment. We get to know them, and then we're able to do our assessment with them.
Wow. I'm wondering about coordinated entry. Are these questions that 211 should be asking people in that age group?
Yeah, I mean, so we have done training with 211. I don't know if they, I'm not sure if they instituted, like if they use it, but we did provide them with the training
Okay.
of the screening tool. And we would hope that it is utilized. You know, we are doing a lot of training, and we hope to continue to do a lot of training with agencies that do have contact with young people experiencing homelessness.
No, that's fantastic. I think that would be something great for us to work on here in Morris County, making sure that this tool is really integrated into all the services that we provide, and making sure people aren't slipping through the cracks, because I'm sure that this is an issue where, as you said, it can be invisible. Even with all these signs, people are not coming out saying, hi, I'm being trafficked. And so we really need to be sensitive as providers and people in the community. So thank you. I'm not seeing questions in the chat. So that's okay. People don't have questions. Feel free to unmute if people would rather just ask questions. Like I just rattled off about a dozen. So
no, and just to let you know, Rebecca, the quit is on our website.
Okay.
But I am going to look for like the link just to bring you exactly there, so you don't have to go through the whole website. And if I don't get it before the end of this call, I'll definitely email it to you.
Great. Thank you so much.
And again, I think I just want to add that we are available to any agency that wants us to do a training on the quit. And, you know, and I'll say it again for the last time, the goal is really not, the goal is not to just identify, is to provide services, so that if your agency can do the identification and the services, then that's a win-win. If your agency can only do the identification, that's great, as long as you refer the client to an agency that could provide the services. And then obviously, you know, we're available for that. We're not the only agency that does trafficking, but that we are the statewide provider.
Yes, we have a question, actually a request. If we could see the last slide again.
Sure.
And just to respond to what you just said, you made a point before we began to explain to me that we should not be like assessing for human trafficking if we're not prepared to provide resources. And that, I mean, that's like a duh, but it was really important for me to hear that like that, because we might be very well intentioned. We're looking out for it, but if we're not prepared to get someone connected right away, that could put somebody at greater risk. So thank you for making sure that we know, both Rolidel and Monica, thank you so much for making sure we know about the services that you provide. I'm so grateful to both of you and the people that you work with for doing this really difficult work. And I learned so much from you today, and I'm sure everyone else feels the same.
Thank you so much.
You're getting lots of very positive feedback in the chat.
Thank you.
And Rolidel, will we be able to share your slides as well in the follow-up email?
Sure, yeah, I'll be more than happy to email it to you.
We really appreciate that.
Yeah, I'm gonna add the link to the slide, Rebecca, today, and email it to you.
That's perfect.
Yeah, I'll do that before I email it to you, and make sure that I email you the link so that you don't have to dig through our website.
Thank you. I'm sure there's lots of good stuff on there that we would want to see anyways, but it's great to just have it ready.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
And you two were so efficient. We actually did wrap up around 11:30. So
thank you.
Whole half hour of the day we don't know what to do with now. I did leave all of the links in the chat. I hope people were able to see them. If you have any questions, you can absolutely feel free to connect with me directly. My email is in the chat. I will stay on. I'll keep the program running a little bit longer, just for anybody who wants to go through the chat or decides that they want to ask me a question or give information for follow-up to be emailed out. But I would say that we can wrap up now if there are no further questions. And thank you so much to our presenters. And thank you, Jennifer, for putting this together once again.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much for inviting me.
Absolutely. I learned so much. I really, okay, I have one more question. Because it made me think about when we encounter somebody who's experiencing domestic violence, we need to be really sensitive about encouraging someone to leave that situation. Like, we see that they're at risk as a provider, or whether you're just someone in that person's life, you're concerned for them. You want to make sure that they get connected to resources. But you could be putting that person in greater risk if you're encouraging them to like leave today, or if you're not being discreet about what you're suggesting that they do. And I'm just curious what each of you would recommend we do in the context of a human trafficking concern related to that.
Monica, did you want to talk first? I'm looking at my slides. I mean, I'm all about giving people information. One of the slides that I didn't include is about universal education, right? Where it's sort of from the provider to the survivor. So we're not eliciting information, we're giving information, right? And it's used quite often in healthcare settings where the provider is saying to someone, you know, if you're interested in information about domestic violence, here are some pamphlets, right? So you start providing them with information, and you do this, you know, it's paired. The P is for privacy, E is for education, A is for act, and R is for like report and respect. So you're giving the information, and you're hoping that in giving the information that the person in front of you will then open up, right? But if they don't feel comfortable, if it's just not the time, that you're still giving them the information so that when they're ready to make that contact, that they have the information on hand.
Mm-hmm.
So Monica?
Yeah, I think one of the recommendations I would say is, like, if you think you're really seeing something, you can't assume that they want to leave. You can't assume that they're ready to make that change, and forcing that in that moment may put them at more danger, kind of like was already stated. If you're picking up on some red flags, it might be recommended, if you're kind of in that conversation, to maybe call Covenant House and see if they can get one of their specialists to talk to them if they're open to those services, or bring somebody in who's trained in kind of getting that information. There's also a state like police number where you can report tips around human trafficking.
Mm-hmm.
And so if you feel like you really want to do something and you have a license plate number, you can provide that and kind of do something. And they're not going to go out and investigate that probably right away, but they can take a collection. Human trafficking is an issue that the state of New Jersey takes very seriously. So there are those resources there. I would not recommend inserting yourself into that relationship and trying to save that person. That's not typically, remember the psychological connection, and that this person may rely on the trafficker for a lot of things. So I think between my recommendations and Rolidel's, there's a lot there. So
Yes.
Yeah.
Thank
and
you.
the number that
perfect.
Monica was referring to, I don't know if, but it's called the Regional Operational Intelligence Center.
Okay.
And that is the state number to report any type of crime, actually. So you can report
Okay.
anything there, including, you know, if you feel that trafficking is happening.
Okay, thank you. We'll make sure we email that as well. I see we have a raised hand from Taisha.
Yeah,
Taisha,
hi,
please feel, oh great, you were able to unmute yourself. Go ahead, thank you.
sorry. I just have a question. I think it's geared towards Monica. I'm thinking about the time when perhaps we work in a school. If a student, and we have protocols that the principal takes, but I'm just wondering for my own knowledge. If you have a student who comes to you it's reported. And then I guess it goes to you guys in some sector of your services. Since you work for the legal end of things, there's a gap, I would think, between reporting and when that person, the victim, may feel like they have to report back to this perpetrator. Is there a legal system in place that could help this youth feel comforted or protected, that they could legally be protected from this person? Is there something that, like, practically, in a practical sense, that can happen before they feel like they have to report back and receive this extra trouble?
So let me make sure I understand the question. So you're saying that a victim could be at school and they report the incident, and you're saying what could be put into place before they have to go back to the trafficker?
Right. I'm wondering if, I know that for most people, young and old alike, they feel more protected when there's a legal system behind them. Is there something in place that could kind of be, that's a wall between them and the person, where they may feel a little more secure?
I think this issue that you're bringing up is like probably the number one reason why people don't report. Because what can we say to a person to protect them? There's not really like witness protection, or lots of times people get connected to services before they report to police. Because once that report is made, that client is probably not going to go back to the trafficker. It's going to be public record. That report is made. They're going to be doing an investigation. They're going to talk to the trafficker. So it's not going to be safe for that person to be there. Case management like Covenant House will help place them somewhere. You can get restraining orders. You can move out of state. You can do things to protect yourself. But if a client is going to report the incident to an adult, and adults are going to want to take action at that point, they're going to be at really high risk to return back to the setting that it's happening in. Did that answer your question? So legally, there's things that can be done to protect that client once they make the report, and there's attorneys that can accompany them to make the report to law enforcement and things like that. But I'm not sure what legal protection would exist if they're going to return back to the trafficker.
No, I mean legal protection prior to them feeling like they have to report back. So I see what you're saying. You try to get services in place before they make the report. Is that what?
Yeah, Rolidel, you see that too, right? Like that's something that we talk to the clients about, and they can get legal. They can talk to an attorney about the best way to report, who to report to, what that would look like, things like that. So they can call and consult an attorney about that.
I would say even at the crisis center, that's the shelter in New York. I'm sorry, I call it the crisis center. Even at the crisis center and working with our young people, the desire to report is not always there. Like, so we worry about services and wrap around them that way. And then obviously, if they ever want to make a report, then we're there to support them.
Yeah, a client could.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I was going to say at least with the young people we've worked with, and obviously, I haven't worked with every young person, but a lot of the young people we work with are never really want to ever make a report. That's not what they're looking to do. They really just want the help.
Yeah, sadly, there's statute of limitations for reporting this type of thing as well. And keep in mind, just like reporting domestic violence or rape or something, you're not guaranteed to get justice. So a teen who's experiencing this, you weigh the risks and rewards of turning your trafficker in, it's probably not going to be, they might not choose, I want to go forward with that. Plenty of people do. We have a lot of brave survivors who put victim witness impact statements together, or they testify against that person. But in the grand scheme of things, we can't guarantee an outcome that would make it worth their life or time to take that stance. But there's a lot of services that could be put in place to get that person into a safer space and psychologically, physically, to get them, to move forward in their life without necessarily involving a court case.
And when it's a youth, does the family have to make their own arrangements to, let's say they want to move states, or do you guys provide services where the whole family can go since that child is a minor?
victim compensation can cover up to a certain amount. And obviously it's not just one person who's moving, it would be whoever is in that household. But I don't know of a service that moves clients out of state. That would just be a family decision. I'm not sure if Rolidel knows.
Yeah, no, I mean, I don't know. I know we have worked with survivors that wanted to move, and we would help somebody move out of state if we know that they have like a support system, right? We don't do the jumping state to state because that just puts you more at risk. And we help survivors come back to New Jersey if the reason why they left Jersey was because of the trafficking, right? So like if their trafficker moved them out of state and they want to come back, we will help them relocate back to New Jersey. I put the link to the quit, and it's going to bring you to the research that we published, but just go to page 36 and that'll bring you to the quit. And I was looking for the number for the ROIC while Taisha was talking. So looking for that. If we stay on, I'll put it in. If not, I'll just email it to you, Rebecca.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
I was also going to ask about that report, so I'm so happy that we have access to that now.
Yeah, you have access to that for sure.
Taisha, thank you for those great questions. That was some really good discussion. And as Monica said, we could really go on all day talking more about this and learning more.
Thank you.
Feel free to jump in with a question, but I will just say to anybody who's on this webinar who is not already a member of CAS or Youth Advocate Committee, we would love to have you. And if you're not really sure what CAS is, even after my introduction today, you can email me, and I also put our webpage link in the chat so you can check it out. But we meet each month right now, and it's really a collaboration of Morris County providers focused on homelessness services. We also have community members and people with lived experience attend. We really, the goal is to work together to make sure our system works as efficiently as possible, that we're meeting important gaps. And that's one of the reasons Jennifer made sure that we provided this webinar today, is because human trafficking services are, they're out there, as we just heard from Rolidel and Monica. But even not even I, but I work at a shelter, and I didn't know how to get people connected. And so I'm so glad now that I do. And if anybody has requests for future trainings, like information that you feel like needs to get out there, if you provide a service that you feel like is a really major gap and we need to spread the word, we would be very happy to work with you. So please do get in touch.
I will send you my slides and some of those resources. And I also have like a form if people could fill out, what they thought of the program. I'd really appreciate it because it helps us inform how we change and prepare.
Thank you. That would be great.
Mm-hmm.
Well, as I said a couple minutes ago, I will let the program run a little bit longer, but everyone can feel free to jump off if you're done. If anybody wants to go into the chat, get any of the information, we'll make sure we email it out, but it's there for you now if you don't want to remember it later. We're really grateful to everybody who participated today.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Have a good weekend.
Thank you.
Too.
Rebecca, you work in Morris County, correct? You work
I work at Family Promise, and I'm with our outreach program. So I'm at our drop-in center at 51 Washington Street, right across from the courthouse. So the services we provide there are for anybody who wants to walk in and get connected. We're usually helping people access benefits, shelter, housing programs. But that is a place that we are absolutely going to start doing your screening to people that we
awesome.
To make sure that they're getting referred appropriately.
Oh, that's great. Makes us happy. That's our goal. This is the 2022 goal. We're actually with Covenant House International. We're going to bring this now to all of our sites. A lot of our sites use it, but we want to get everyone on board to use it as the screening tool. So
yes, no, I'm so glad because it's a really excellent tool. I'm beyond impressed with like the thoughtfulness of how you phrase the questions. thinking about not re-traumatizing people, that's also important. And I mean, just Covenant House's response to this incredible need is just, it's so on point. And you did your due diligence through years of research, you know, experts weighing in. I'm just very happy that this exists. Taisha asked if there was a certificate for this training, and unfortunately there is not a certificate, Taisha. So I'm sorry, we won't be sending that out. If I hear of something else where it provides continuing education or something like that, I'll make sure we email that as well. With it being National Human Trafficking Prevention Month, there is a lot of other programming going on right now.
Is Family Promise Center like the point of entry in Morris County?
So we work with coordinated entry, if that's what you're asking about.
Okay.
You're asking about coordinated entry for shelter?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yes. So we refer a lot of people to the 211 hotline, and we also have resource navigators who connect with people who are on the waiting list and make sure that while someone's waiting for shelter, that they're getting connected to other services that they may need. So we are very much involved with coordinated entry.
Okay.
And we will be talking about adding these questions.
Yeah. Okay. I live in Morris County, but I don't know enough about it. So.
Oh, of course. Well, it's amazing like how much we have. It's fantastic that there are so many services, but I mean, I've been working at Family Promise for the last 9 years, and I still all the time hear about things where I'm like, that has been here. Like we should have been here all the time. That's one of my favorite things about CAS is that we get to, you know, here, that's exactly the place where we try to make sure people learn about other services that are either new or underutilized.
Yeah. Early on, when we first started our trafficking program, Home Solutions was very, very helpful.
Oh, yes.
In Morris County. Yeah.
Oh,
Can't remember the person that we talked a lot with, but she was really, really, really helpful with us when we first launched our program.
Great. Yeah. Home Solutions is fantastic. We work with them a ton. And their Family Promise has a shelter, but Home Solutions is much larger. So I'm glad that this is something that they're doing because they meet a lot of people who would be at risk.
Yeah. I think one of the barriers that we have in connecting to shelters is sometimes, depending what county it is, some of the county shelters only take people through the 211 system, which is not always helpful when you're working with someone before 4:30 p.m. Right? Because they have to wait until 4:30 before they can access 211. So that's been some of the barriers that we've had in trying to help some of our victims and survivors connect to shelters.
Oh,
if we're not talking about a domestic violence shelter.
Right. In Morris County, I know you can contact social services during business hours if the 211 hotline redirects you, but yeah, that's a big issue. You should not be limited to when you can call about something like that.
Yeah. We've hit that wall. It's one of the battles we're gonna fight, maybe not this year, but it's definitely something we need to do some advocacy around for sure.
Yes.
So I'm so sorry. So if you have encountered an issue with that, please reach out to me directly. I'll put my email in the chat. I'm the chair of the Continuum of Care Executive Committee, and that is actually not supposed to be happening. If you have somebody who's homeless, they should be able to be connected not to emergency shelter, but to the shelter system during the daytime. Actually, we restricted it to only during the daytime because we wanted to make sure that we were having a trauma-informed care approach, because what was happening was in the evenings, you don't have a social worker sort of available. If there is a situation where we're asking, you know, because in order to be connected to the homeless system, we need to ask additional questions. And if some of those questions may become triggering, and so because of that, we didn't want to ask those questions in the evenings. So emergency shelter services are available in the evenings, but connection to the system is available during the day. So they should be able to be connected to the system. They may not be immediately placed But what happens is they do go into the coordinated entry system during the day. And then we have case conferencing teams who meet regularly to look at those lists, the people who are on those, and to attempt to work on solutions. And Rebecca's team is part of that case conferencing, as are Homeless Solutions, as are all of the housing system providers in the county, to make sure that if there's something we can connect people to right away, we're connecting them to those services right away. And if there's things that are not available yet, those people are being prioritized for those services. So if you are encountering a problem where you're not being served during the day, or your clients are not being served during the day, please reach out to me. I'm going to put my email in the chat box now.
So much, Allison. Yeah.
Thank you for speaking to that in more detail, Allison. I remember the issue of like the time of when people could be referred came up a while ago, and I thought it was resolved, but I'm glad that that we can talk more about this. And I have a feeling we'll be asking to consult with maybe each of you at some point.
As a matter of fact, if you are interested in becoming part of the coordinated entry system, that is something, we have an MOU that would need to be signed to engage with case conferencing. But if you're interested in becoming part of the coordinated entry system, let me know that too, because we can discuss how to incorporate organizations that represent human trafficking victims and survivors into our coordinated entry system.
Definitely interested in that. Great, I'll email you.
That's wonderful. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
I know, that's like a very nice place to end. I'm so glad that we arrived
Great.
there.
Happy we had that conversation.
Yeah.
Yes. And please feel free to continue the conversation. I mean, you've given so much of your time today. We know how to reach you. I'll make sure I send each of you anything that like from today's discussion, and Allison will as well, anything that we feel like you should have from us, and look forward to speaking with you in the future.
Yeah.
Thank you guys so much. Enjoy your weekend and stay warm.
Yes, you too,
You
especially
too,
you.
Rolly.
I know.
Luck with
I'm
your
in the
heat.
one warm room in the house, so I might stay here for the rest of the day.
Yeah, just hang out there. I think that's a good plan.
I will. Thank you guys.
Good
Thank you so
luck.
much.
Monica,
Thank
we have a
you.
meeting.
Yeah,
I'll
you
send
can.
you.
Yeah.
Oh, yes.
All right. Thank you
All
guys.
right. Bye.
Bye.